Good morning and good Yom Tov. It's Hey Tavis today. And welcome. Okay. So we are learning the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, Chanukah Maimer. And we're on page 369. 369. This Mittler Rebbe's Maimer is based on the Alter Rebbe's Maimer of the same beginning, same title, Mika Hashem Elokeinu, also Chanukah, which we had learned in Torah Eir, the Maimer and its beer, it's just explanation. And both serve as the source material for the conclusion of Ayin Beis, which is why we're learning it. So besides providing context, it'll also provide us with direction of issues and topics and questions that Rebbe Rashab left and never answered completely or at all as he concluded Ayin Beis, but we know he did not finish writing it all. So all of that will be helpful, maybe more than helpful, in understanding where Ayin Beis would have most likely gone had he continued writing it based on what we're learning now. So that since we're coming from Chanukah, very apropos that the Hashgacha Pratis would have it that we learned this Maimer while it was middle of Chanukah and before Chanukah. But the theme continues. So let me sum up what we've been learning and then continue. So the headline is divine soul and animal soul. Their differences, their engagement with each other, and ultimately the purpose being that the divine soul within us educate, train, guide, tame, harness, all the words you want to use, the animal soul to be directed also toward godliness. You can many ways say that's the purpose of our lives. In Tanya, he puts it in those words, explaining the ideas very similarly. There's the battle between the animal soul and the divine soul. And here he uses Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom as being the operative verse, the example of the Ner, the candle, being that a candle consists of a wick, which is like the divine soul, immersed and into the oil, which is the animal soul's intelligence, with the objective of the oil becoming drawn and absorbed into the wick and creating a Eish Hashem, a fire, a divine love, a Haftas Hashem Lekecha B'chol Levavcha B'shnei Yitzarecha, to love God with our entire heart, the right side of the heart and the left side of the heart. But there's obviously a big challenge here, because the divine soul and animal soul are antithetical in every possible way. One is driven, Ruach HaAdam Eila L'mayla, is driven toward godliness, toward transcendence. The other is driven for its own needs, downwards, Ruach HaBehema Yoredas Lamata, downward meaning into earthy things, to the physical world, its own pleasures, its own desires, its own needs. And even the intelligence of the animal soul is about existence, about its own existence, about a general existence. And yet, they are brought together in one person to fight it out, and obviously with the goal that the animal soul, that the divine soul win over the animal soul. Not destroying it, but convincing it, or persuading it, or inspiring it to transform it. So that's the last piece we learned. I have to explain that length, these two forces. And remember, this is based on the Alter Rebbe's Maimer. It's fascinating to see how the Alter Rebbe says it in a few words, and the Mittler Rebbe develops it into a whole discussion. So after explaining the very nature and essence of these two different souls, and definitely goes hand in hand, parallels the explanation given in Tanya. Here there's, however, much more detail. Then comes the issue when they come together. And this is what he calls Chidush Pele Gadol. I'm looking at the bottom of page 368 in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. So Pele Gadol, the Chibur V'Kishur, the Beis HaNefashos Hanal. even though they're beis havchim betachlis. They're diametric opposites. And yet, in their nature and their personality, the Chiddush and Pele Gadol, the great wonder, is that God brings them together, and not only together, but in the way that they work with each other. Like he explains afterwards, as we learned Friday, that they come together like a mohus echad mamish, even though they are so diametrically opposed to each other. Zeu miniflois Hashem. That's from the wonders of God. Shebechaber mekasher dover beifuche mamish. That he binds and connects, or connects and binds one thing with its opposite. And to the point that the keiches, even though it says in Tanya that the divine soul has 10 faculties, and the animal soul has 10 faculties, zelu mazeh, but we don't have 20 faculties. We only have one chachma, one bina. We don't say we have two chachmas, one that belongs to the divine soul and one belongs to the animal soul, or two bina, a bina of the divine and bina of the animal. It's one mind, chachma bina das, one heart, emotions, chesed gvur teferes, netzach ched yesed malchus. The question is, who's going to control it? And when the divine soul is learning Torah and controls chachma bina das, the animal soul goes along with it. So in other words, the keiches, like he put it, kol keich v'frat ben nefesh kis is mislabish, mislapshus, ben nefesh abamis. It manifests within it. And like he goes on to explain that we see when a person conceives of a divine concept, so that is mislabish in the keich of the seichel of the nefesh abamis, that this intelligence, human intelligence of the animal soul can understand it. As he said, with examples, even though on its own, the animal soul's intelligence is all about the fragmented material world, but it could be explained, the divine, al derech teva murgish hamuskal, like he says, Anushis akrevim lahasig memenu hanimshul b'seichel haliki kameshul lamayla. With examples and comparisons, the animal soul can be taught to understand divine ideas. And he gave one example. He gave the example, for example, creation itself, the chachma tata of God's intelligence and design and wisdom in creating existence, ma'ayin liyesh. That also seichel anushi b'derech dimin mashal gashmi kechayis hanefesh beguv. For example, you can explain to the animal soul like the idea of life of the soul within the body, or esis hadibur, that when you speak, the words are filled with your energy, and similar. Achi yechayev zegam haseichel anushi kila royer yechushis, to the point that also human intelligence compels. And is compelled. It compels the argument to make the case for godly energy, to the point of like seeing it with your own eyes. So you see here that when the nefesh elokis engages with nefesh abamis, even though they're fundamentally, initially two opposites, but they do engage, and one can explain and speak to the other. Though this is the exact opposite of the seichel anushi on its own, on its own, it would only be interested in physical matter, in the physical, in the mundane, in its own pleasures and desires. However, that doesn't mean you can't get its attention explained to a divine concept. Obviously, all this is setting up the stage here of how the divine soul impacts the animal soul. So he called that a pella. Godly. That is in the world of seichel. How about midas? Seichel, you could say, okay, fine. The animal soul is an intelligent creature, so it responds to intelligence. Give me an intelligent argument for godliness. The animal soul is not going to say no, even though it has its own desires. It's inquisitive and curious, and it's smart. So it'll understand. But what about the midas of the nefesh habamis? The midas of nefesh habamis are not driven by seichel; they're driven by impulse, and the midas of nefesh elokis are driven by godliness. So the godly midas of ava v'yir and love and reverence of God, of the divine soul, are diametric opposite to the emotions of the love and the other emotions of the animal soul, which are all driven for its own pleasure. Do these two also speak to each other? Like Seichel? She says yes. Kamoi Kain, again, we learned all this. I'm just going over it again. And it's quite powerful material because it's so relevant to our daily struggles. So he says, Kamoi Kain onerein gam b'midas hativim shebelev. Basar Agashmi malbishim lemidas aviyira lekisha b'nefesh lekisa el lamayla. That the natural emotions of the animal soul, the flesh, the very flesh, physical flesh, are malbishim. They enclose the emotions of love and reverence of the divine love and reverence of the divine soul, which is transcendent. The Hainu, he says like this, that you can actually affect the animal soul, that that the emotions and the passion of the divine soul can actually impact that the animal soul too should get excited and stimulated by some godly experience to the point that it wants to leave and strip itself from physical desires, and it wants to be encompassed and attached by Hashem b'chol libei mamish, like we say, b'chol levavcha b'shnei yetzerecha. So b'chol levavcha afilu b'yetzehara sheb'chol lasmali, which means also the yetzehara on the left side of the heart can be stimulated, can be aroused toward a divine love, not just love for its own desires. Even though on its own it's molei taivus ras, on its own it would only be drawn to physical pleasures, its own pleasures. Im kain, harizeh hepech hateva agashmi shebelev she'ein rak l'taivus atzmei. So it's against its nature, but it happens. That it could be affected, that it should despise, it should it should reject. In the chayav agashmi, meaning the pleasures of its own life, and it should completely be focused together with the divine soul only toward God. The heart should be completely driven to God, completely drawn to godliness. Okay, and finally, that's Seichel and Midas. Then he concludes, and the same thing as the rest of everything we do. U'kamoi kain, gam b'chol asher yasa adam b'pizra nefesh habamis b'chol hasokov. In all the matters that the nefesh habamis is involved in, all the fragmented, scattered activities that we do throughout the day, all of it, we have the capacity to direct it all. Yalla hakol alakuz betfila shebelev, or b'mitzvus ma'asis b'kavana v'reusa deliba. There's the capacity that should all be elevated and directed toward godliness and davening in the heart, with the heart, and through action, mitzvahs with intention, and the desire of the heart of the soul. Shemalabashim b'dvarim gashmim, that manifest in physical matters. You could eat a meal and do your business, all Hashem Shamayim. You could. It doesn't mean you have to, but you could. So you see that Nefesh Habamis could be directed and guided to follow suit and also direct itself toward godliness, which all this is called Birurim de Klippas Nega. Shekolza Nikre Birurim de Klippas Nega Kiyadua. This is called the Birurim of Klippas Nega of the Nefesh Habamis, as he explains in Tanya. V'hainu, adema, shekol keiches hanefesh habamis mislapshin davke b'keiches nefesh habamis. So you see that even though initially the divine soul and animal soul are two different worlds, but by the animal soul, the divine soul manifesting within the animal soul, within its faculties, and they become like one mahus, one personality, kanal achein and nikir, to the point you can't distinguish between the excitement of the midas and seichel in godliness. You can't distinguish, is this an excitement coming from the divine soul? Then okay, or is it coming from the physical, natural soul of the animal soul. That's how, in other words, when you're really consumed, the person is consumed with godliness, whether it's in seichel, in midas, or everything he's doing, it becomes like one force, one person aligned with a purpose. And we all have examples of this. It's not just with tzaddikim. We all have times when you're completely aligned. I mean, completely as one could be, whether it's your business or tzedakah that you're giving, or the meals you eat, or other things you do in divrei reshus, in the chol drachecha de'eyu and kol masech l'shem shemayim, and you see it all aligned. Obviously, it's a battle, and we still have to figure out how to maintain this. But the fact is, the fact that it could be done tells you that it's a tremendous wonder, because these are two forces that are more opposite than even in fire and water, and yet they could work together. That's where we got up. That's where we reached. I especially am elaborating in my summary because it's a very fundamental piece. It's always I would suggest marking it down. It's always good to go back to next time you have a battle with your animal soul. Maybe read this section. It's a good section to read because it shows us that we have hope in the ability to get these two forces to work together as one. So that's where we stopped, by the parentheses. Unless anyone has any questions, I'm ready to continue learning. Any questions?
I have a question, and I don't think I was in this class. Anyways, I'll ask. In other words, if I were in the class, I hope I would have asked this question then. So the idea of the birur levara the klipas noga to refine klipas noga, and it's essentially to refine this lowest world, is not a new concept, right? Obviously, you could, like you said, it's tachlis, it's the purpose of the human being, one of the main purposes. But
right.
Here he's saying, this is directly related to the idea of how can the nefesh elokis, let's say, persuade the sechel hativis, the natural intelligence of the nefesh of the animalistic soul, to go along with it and get excited and engage in elakus, and thereby he's merging these concepts. And previously, I mean, like I said, birurim is an obvious wide-scale, massive concept of Chassidus. It's not new. But this idea that we've been focusing on to fill in how the Rebbe Rashab would have finished his Hemshech, and the issue of the divine soul persuading the animal soul. This is let's see, more precise. It's
What's the question? I don't hear the question.
Okay, I'm about to ask. The question is: Isn't this a more specific type of birur here? And it's not just focused. It's not it's part of the larger mission, but it's a specific type of birur. In other words, they're the same. You could say that this birur of persuading the animal soul, the human intelligence to become godly, okay, you could say that's one aspect of the birurim that we're supposed to be engaging in general in our life. But to say that they're the exact same thing, I mean, then you're saying this idea that we've been studying, in depth about the candle is just the mushal of this larger concept that we've known about in Chassidus for hundreds of pages.
So what's the question you're saying? Why does he say it here if we learned it elsewhere?
No, God forbid. I'm saying I had thought this was a particular type of birur. It's not.
Why can't the central theme be in many different places in Chassidus?
It can. The question is this a unique aspect of the birur?
I mean, I don't know what unique means. It's unique to each individual in Aveda, of course. Your animal soul is different than mine. Anyone who's engaging in this process of aligning their mind, their emotions, and their actions from selfish desires to the divine has a unique experience. And I'm sure every day is different. So in that sense, it's unique. But in the general picture of it, that is the Aveda, that Tanya.
Yeah.
So I mean,
I
there's
guess
no
what I'm
reason.
thinking.
We're not
Yeah.
looking for We're not looking. This is not getting points for originality here. We're getting understanding. He's using the Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, the mashal of the Ner, which we'll get back to at some point. But overall, yes, he's talking about the divine soul and the animal soul. It's like asking, is the Alter Rebbe in his Tanya speaking about something unique or in general? It's both general and unique. That's how I understand.
Well, I guess I'm okay. So let me give you an example. I think I understand why they're the same. So let's say I decide I don't know. I had a paid I got a bonus, okay, at work, and I've been wanting to go on some exotic vacation for a long time, but I know that my community is in a cash crunch. My Jewish community, my shul, is in a massive cash crunch, and I was just recently asked to donate more than my fair share. So I say clearly, it'd be better to take my money and use it for the shul rather than for my own selfish pleasure. So I could say I'm being mavarer, the world by taking this money I earned and using it for a good purpose rather than for myself. That would seem like let's call it a general mirror. But I guess in order to get to that, I would have to have a transformation internally and turn off the selfish gene. And I know I'm not speaking Hasidic language; I'm speaking very Balabatic language. But turn off the selfish, which is a taiva for myself, and convert it to something that's godly. So they are the same thing. I guess I'm now convincing myself you can't get the former without first
No,
getting
you
your
could. There
head
are many ways. There are people can. Maybe you don't convince your animal soul. You just do it anyway. You
right.
could
So that's
also
my
just do
question.
it because you want to. Yeah, but
Well,
that's not the discussion. That's not relevant. Not the Tanya, not here. That's already the specifics that every person has to go through in their battle. That's in general. That's what you're describing is everything we all go through it all the time. And there's different ways we deal with it. Sometimes we educate our animal soul. Sometimes we just tell it that's what I'm going to do, period. And you just overrule it. But that's a personal application of these ideas. That's not the theme here in the Mittler Rebbe's Maamar, or for that matter, Tanya. Tanya speaks about the battle. There are many aspects to this battle. How you fight the battle, early stages, later stages, deeper stages, the stages where the mind is convinced, but the emotions are not yet, the actions are not yet. I mean, there's so many ways to, if you're saying to me, yes, the battle between the divine and animal soul is a constant in every person's life, and it manifests in millions and infinite different possibilities.
right.
That's all.
Yeah. No, I guess I just never merged the concept of this very focused transformation of the nefesh behemoth.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's the same thing.
Okay.
Okay, I think you answered the question.
Okay. Any other questions? So now we continue on the parentheses. There's like 3/4 down the page, 369. If you want to follow along, it's on page. The pages are at ayimbeis.com. But regardless, even if you don't have the pages, I'll explain it all. So now he says like this. He's going to give an example of a scenario where the Nefesh Habamis and Nefesh Alikis are all bound as one, directed toward godliness. As we know in our lives today, this is a battle, which means at times they're very, they're very opposed to each other, and they fight with each other, like Yaakov and Esau. But there is, like he said, scenarios where the divine soul manifests within the animal soul, and they're aligned, like he said, Kimahu Sechad. She says, Ukidug Mizu, Hoyibo Adam Arish and Kedem Achet. To give a little more, I guess, understanding of this state of seamlessness, where two forces are like one, he says, Kedug Mizu, like this state, was by Adam Arishan before Chet Tzadas. Shagashmi is the Gufe. Remember, he was a physical entity because God had taken dust from the ground, earth from the ground, right? Shaped it into a body. Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim, and he breathed into its nostrils the breath of life, the breath of God. Vahi lo adam nefesh chayim. He became a living entity. made up of a physical body from earth, now that's alive with a soul. So God, like he said before, it's from his wonders that he can bring together these two realities. So before the Chet, however, he had not sinned yet. So there was no dissonance. Everything was seamless. So he says, the Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, the Gufa Yechomer L'Tzura HaLekis. His body was a chaymer, was like a keli. A chaymer means tzura and chaymer. Chaymer is like the clay, and the tzura is the shape that you shape the clay into. So the guf was a chaymer l'tzura L'Kis, to the divine spirit, or to the divine shape, if you wish. Really, tzura here is not really shape; it's more like spirit, like soul. The nishmase of his neshama. So you have a body and soul completely aligned, because God created it. Yitzir kapim shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. He shaped the body, and within it, he infused a breath of life called the neshama. That he blew, he breathed into it, into its nostrils. Nishmas chayim, a living soul. Bli avdola klal beinehem. To the point that once they came together, you couldn't distinguish which part is the soul and which part is the body. Even right now, when you look at a living person, look at yourself. Which part is your soul, which part is your body? The soul is so infused and so seamlessly connected with your body, you can't really distinguish between the two. The only time you can distinguish is either before birth or before life, or God, or after 120 years, after life. But when a person's alive, it's not like two elements that you brought together, hydrogen and oxygen. Even there becomes water, but here it's even deeper than that. There's no distinction between them. Klal b'neihem. Now here he doesn't just mean physically, because physically we also have a neshama b'guf like that. Here he means also spiritually, that the body didn't have its own agenda. Before the Chet, Adam was only following what God wants him to do. That's his main focus here. Because the physical, you don't need an example from Adam. You can give the example from each one of us, as I just said. But here he wants to also say that his spiritual aspirations and his material aspirations were all fused into one. Gimel could be Gdelim, it could be Gemurim. I think it's Gedalim. The same was by great tzaddikim, Ka'avis or Moshe, like the patriarchs Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Moshe, Ukahai Gavna, and others similar. So Yotomid b'Mesiras Nefesh b'Gufam, they were constantly in a constant state of Mesiras Nefesh with their bodies, K'moy b'Nishmasa Mamash. Just as it was with the neshama. In other words, they weren't just that the neshama was ready to connect to give itself to God, but their bodies also. So they were both aligned. They all had bodies. Obviously, the Avis and Moshe, they had physical bodies, but the entire focus of their lives was godliness. U'kamesha kosav Rabbi Akiva. U'kamesha Amar Rabbi Akiva, rather. Like Rabbi Akiva said, Kol Yomai, all my days, he doesn't say that, he just says Hulu, all my days, I was mitzvayed, I was pained over whether I will be able to be Mesiras Nefesh for Hashem. So in Rabbi Akiva, the end of his life, when he was being literally and brutally killed by the Romans, with that metal comb that is described, he says, all my life I was waiting for my whole being to be give itself Mesiras Nefesh to Hashem, including his body, not just his soul. Afilu neitlas nafshecha, based on the Maamorei Chazal that says there that b'chol nafshecha, even if your nefesh is taken, means you're giving your soul, not just you're giving your soul, even if your soul is taken from you, which means that you have to give up your life. He's ready to do that as well. So you see that the guf and the neshama were aligned as one. Obviously, there's a high level, spoken clearly, tzaddikim g'delim, like this. Mashenkin beinanim, by contrast, beinanim, like he says in Tanya, Shezeh v'zeh shefton. By Beinim, you don't have that. A Beini, we know, has zeh v'zeh shefton. It has two judges, has two voices. The voice of the divine soul, the voice of the animal soul, like he explains in chapter 13 in Tanya. Leprokim is gaber chelik hara shebenefesh habamis. At times, the ra, the part that is evil or selfish, dominates the animal soul. Liyas b'chinas pirud melikus, and then it's like in a state of being separate, dissonance from godliness. Ulapamim kamei b'krishma v'tfilah. And at times, like during Shema and davening, yuchlo v'yischaber b'nefesh halikis. The nefesh habamis will be encompassed and connected with the nefesh halikis, like he says in chapter 12 in Tanya. V'dai lemevin. Another expression you'll see commonly used by the Mittler Rebbe. That's enough. For the maven, it's enough said. The rest you can figure out. So you see here the parentheses simply comes to solidify and strengthen the case of how the nefesh halikis, nefesh habamis can work seamlessly by the Adam and by the tzaddikim daily. That's how it is all the time. And by a Beinani, it's not that way all the time. At times it could be it's not because he has two voices, and it's only during davening that you can have that type of alignment. Okay. Yeah, pretty clear parentheses. Anyone wants to ask anything about the parentheses? I think it's pretty self-understood. Now he says, punchline, V'zehu, what we spoke about just a moment ago. V'zehu kol ikar ateirim mitzvah shenitnu lo'adam. And this is the primary, this is the whole purpose, kol ikar, of Torah mitzvahs that's given to the human being, v'chol yemei chayav, throughout his whole entire life, all the days of his life. That what? Shivarer, that he should separate, clarify, and refine, yitaken and repair, the nefesh habamis, is an animal soul, the taruva is tevera shaba, where there's the mixture, that mixture of toiv, godliness, good, and ra, selfishness and evil, that he should, the taruvis is mixed together, and the whole Torah mitzvah through his entire life. The purpose is to make order and repair that confusion. Shabbat v'hainu, and how? And that means al yedei slapshus the keiches the nefesh halikis, through the faculties of the divine soul manifesting in clothing themselves. That which is the bechinas ruach ha'adam canal. Nefesh halikis is ruach ha'adam eil lamayla, transcendent spirit. Bekeich is the nefesh habamis. That the nefesh halikis should manifest itself into the faculties of the divine soul should manifest into the faculties of the animal soul. Tafke canal. Tafke, that's the purpose. Tafke there. Ad sheyil nefesh achas or nefesh echad mamish, to the point they become one nefesh mamish, even though it's a nefesh halikis, a nefesh habamis, which is called shitei nefashis in Tanya. The goal is to make them one, aligned as one. Oz, and then aydezem is bar kol b'chinas atev hagonus v'nelam b'nefesh habamis. Then you draw out, or you can say, you reveal all the hidden good and concealed and hidden good in the animal soul, umispared v'nivdel chelke ara, and you scatter, like in a sense, like almost discard and separate. It's like taking out the pits when you pit a fruit. So you draw out the fruit and you eliminate and you discard and separate the chelke ara, the negative parts, sheba legamri, im b'derech kfiyah, or in a way of kfiyah, leikafya, the sitra achra. That's through compelling it, by forcing it out, which means you haven't transformed it, you just overpower it. that you're controlling the other side, where you bend and you subjugate the selfishness in the heart, that it should be subjugated or nullified, and subjugated, and that animal part should not follow its own whims. Or the next page, 370. That's iskafia. A higher level, oi sheyavchonu sheyagam hu mispal belev basar, or you transform it. The first approach is you reject it and you just subdue it, you control it. Here you're transforming it, that it too should get excited in the heart. That the animal soul too should get stimulated by godliness. Belev basar, in the physical flesh, the flesh, the heart of flesh. Im belev nishbar ubiyiras bereishis, and here too he's giving options, or in a way where the heart is broken. Belev nishbar, he's like broken the heart. Ubiyiras bereishis, yiras bereishis. The Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, there's yiras haratzua. You can have fear of punishment. You can have fear of different things. Yiras bereishis is the reverence of God that comes from shame, where you feel I'm in such presence, how could I behave this way? Yiras Ritzua is more on a lower level. It's more the concern that you have. I don't want to be punished. I want to benefit, and so on. Yiras Bereishis is more standing in presence of greatness, and you have an element of shame. Machmas Gedulas Hashem, due to the greatness of God, Shemasi Gam B'Seichel Anushis, that also the human intelligence can appreciate and understand. V'yeda b'teidel Hashem, and acknowledges with gratitude or acknowledgement to God, b'shvach v'tehillah, with praise and accolades. In other words, here we're not talking about you subdued the animal soul alone. You've actually gotten it to be stimulated by recognizing the greatness of God, so it too feels that healthy shame, a healthy sense of awe, if you wish, and to the point that it's acknowledging the greatness of God. Okay, Ukamai Kain is giving yet another aspect of this is Gam b'mesiras nefesh b'krishma, that the animal soul could also be impacted by the mesiras nefesh when we say krishma, b'chol avavcha, we say with all your heart, afilu b'yetzer hara kanal, which means b'shnei yetzerecha, even with the yetzer hara, you also feel. Why he calls it mesiras nefesh? Because he's talking about Shema, which is generally associated with mesiras nefesh. Okay, so this already is a deeper level than iskafia. Shalzeh Amar b'Zeyar. This level of transformation, on this the Zeyar says, Man de mahapach hashech l'neheret umerira lemisku. It doesn't bring the last word. That for the one who transforms darkness to light and bitter to sweet, v'ra l'teiv, and evil to good, yiske l'chaya elam haba. He will merit to life in the world to come. Shu gamken ha'eram izgalim min ha'helam ha'elyon. That this light was also initially a hidden, and through your Aveda, through this Aveda, a person comes to transformation. This Eir is mizgalim min ha'helam ha'elyon, from where? From the level of cheshech sisrei kiyadua. It says, Yashas cheshech sisrei, God has made himself his hiding place is in the dark, is in concealment. So in that concealment, you're revealing it through this Aveda from that hidden place. Like he said before, the good that was hidden in the Nefesh Abamis is revealed. Now he's talking about revealing his higher level of Eir that comes when a person transforms darkness to light. So it's a higher level of Eir than just if you just reveal light alone. The Kol Zeh, and all this, it's all through the energy, the light of the divine soul radiating into the animal soul. And this is the inyan where the spirit of man, that transcends, shelet, rules, and governs in the spirit of the animal that goes downward. The Adam gematria ma, like we learned earlier, Adam is gematria ma, the bitl of ma, mevarer laban gematria behema, refines ban, which is the gematria behema. So you have the man, the human, the soul, refining the animal. Kumeshakos Adam kiyakiv mikem, Adam kiyakiv min behema. You say Adam when he will bring an offering from a behema, min behema, Adam dafke, hu amakriv. Who's the one that brings the offering of the behema, which also refers to the animal soul? It's dafke, the Adam is the one that's bringing it. Amakriv umaylu lanefesh habamis. He brings the offering. Makriv also means karev, from the word kirev, brings it closer and elevates the animal soul. Uksiv Adam behema teshia. Pasuk says Adam behema teshia will be the Yeshua. Hashem teshia Hashem rather. Shekayich zel Adam teshia Hashem. That this power of the Adam that also brings along the behema teshia Hashem. That's what God, either God empowers or that is brings the salvation of God. Like it says elsewhere. I'll finish the end of the paragraph, then stop for questions. And according to this, it's understood, al kaponim, even though the meaning, to somewhat it's understood, that even though the very creation of the animal soul, he said, was from emek ra, selfish, shanim shech b'mekede, and that's how it, as it comes from its source, from Tohu. V'nikri yetzer hara, b'chinis yitzira canal, and it's called yetzer hara because like yitzira chadash, it's shaped in that way as it comes into the midas. Im kol zeh, despite that's how it's created, misapeches kula l'kedusha, it's totally transformed to holiness. L'kedusha l'kis, to divine holiness. Al yidei nefesh l'kis, through the divine soul. B'slapshu shala b'chol keiches sheba b'chol prat kanal, by the divine soul entering and enclothing itself in every detail of the animal soul. Like we said, it becomes like one. That transforms the animal soul. V'zeu shekasav yomim yetzrei. And that's what it means, yomim yetzrei, that God gives a person a certain amount of days. Yetzrei from the word yetzira. V'chein, kitzel yeminei ala oretz, shenitlu la'adam. It says there also the word kitzel yeminei ala oretz. Like the shadow on earth. A human being is given a certain amount of measured days. According to the amount he has to repair of his animal soul. The soul itself, like we learned earlier, does not need repair. The soul is a divine soul. The only reason it did not descend only into the body and the animal soul, only to transform the evil or the selfishness of the animal soul to good, like we discussed earlier. Again, v'dai lemevin. So with that, he sums up, concludes the actual interaction of nefesh l'kis, nefesh habamis. Obviously, the big question is how? How does the divine soul convince the animal soul? That's going to be the theme that he's going to continue to discuss. But the Mittler Rebbe is elaborating on this idea where these two come together and the divine soul impacts the animal soul, despite it being initially its opposite. Okay. Any questions now? Let me stop here for questions. Excuse me.
I have a question if no one else is going to ask. I have this question about this this anecdote of Rabbi Akiva, and it's not just him. And there are many stories about Gedolim, tzaddikim who want to have the opportunity to be Mesiras Nefesh, even to give up their lives so that they can essentially make the ultimate merger between the godly soul and the animal soul, this birur here. And like you said in this, what we just read, but it occurred to me, and I guess I'll exclude tzaddikim from this maybe, but because they're kulo, they're only good, but it seems like almost as, forgive me, but a little bit of a selfish impulse for the person who says, I've lived my whole life for the opportunity to prove to God, or to prove to, I don't know, myself, or to that I give up all of myself for God. Now it's a great Kiddush Hashem. Don't misunderstand me, please.
What's that? But you're quoting him wrongly. It's not what he said.
Okay.
He said, all my life, I aspired to this.
Right. I guess
it wasn't. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, but literally, to be Moser Nefesh literally is to give up your life for God, for the sake of God.
Okay.
But,
so what's the question? Yeah.
Well, wouldn't it be a greater Kiddush Hashem and a greater effort to the collective to stick around and help others be Mevarer and educate, teach, and improve this world generally? I mean, it's great for me to say, "Oh, I'd love to get as close as I can to God. I'm even willing to give up my life."
You can't figure out an answer to that question?
Honestly, I can't, because you're either in this world helping to fix this world and improve it and help other people, or you're dead and you're in Gan Eden. It's one or the other.
Okay, so let me answer this question. If Rabbi Akiva took his life and jumped off a mountain, or went, God forbid, or went and did something to sacrifice himself to God, it'd be a legitimate question. He did not. He spent his life teaching and teaching and teaching. It was when the Romans, in their brutality, were killing him, he said to his students, my whole life, because all tzaddikim, even when they sacrifice themselves to be here with their students and to do everything, always want to be one with God. That's why it's such a Mesiras Nefesh for them to stay here. They all stay here. You haven't seen any that gave themselves up to die. No tzaddik ever did that. It came when they were forced, and they had to be. And once they're forced, they say, "The truth is, I always wanted to be one with God." So it's exactly the opposite. That you never find that anyone ever does it except when there's no choice. And then, so basically, a soul always wants to connect. A soul like a tzaddik like this always wants to give up its entire life to be one with God. And that's what makes it so powerful, that they stay here exactly to serve the people and to serve in this world and to serve and bring. So no neshama ever want. Every neshama, it says, al karcha chatachai. Every neshama wants to be close to God, but it listens to God's rules and stays in this world. So that's why you don't find anyone never doing that. Anyone ever doing that Mesiras Nefesh, except when there's no choice. They're imposed upon them.
Okay, thank you. I understand. It did cross my mind, but it still seems like a self-serving statement. He should pray to God, hey, there's some way you can get me out of this.
No, it's not self-serving, because he stayed. What do you mean? The actions show that despite the fact that he said that, did he ever
stuck around? Yeah.
Did he ever once not compromise his students or anyone? Never.
Right. No.
That just tells you how. But that's the way it's supposed to be. A soul should always want to be one with God. It only because it's commanded not to. That's why al karcha chatachai. That's the way it's meant, that the soul is forced to stay here, but it always wants to go up. That's not out of selfishness; it's out of nature that it wants to be one with God.
Thank you. That was very well said. I understand much better now. Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any other questions?
Sorry you're not feeling well, Rabbi. We're full shlema.
Yeah. It's all right. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? Again, I would definitely encourage you all to look at the Maimer and the Alter Rebbe in Torah Miketz, because you'll see the richness of how the Mittler Rebbe gives it so much more substance and so much more flavor. What the Alter Rebbe says all this, but you don't see it there because it's so short. So I can't say he says it all. I should rephrase. It's all contained there, and you see the Mittler Rebbe like drawing it out. It's fascinating to see, and you literally see Bina and Chachma at work. The Alter Rebbe's Chachma and the Mittler Rebbe's Bina developing these ideas. As I said, if we had more time and it was the focus, I would show it to you, but I think everybody can look themselves. You'll see the few lines from the Alter Rebbe and how the Mittler Rebbe has expanded it in a serious way. And still not over. Okay, so do we continue here? Let me see here. Yeah, why not? Let's continue a little more. So next paragraph. And just to not lose sight of the theme and the destination and point of departure, I should say as well, keep in mind the whole point of all this is to come back and understand how the Nefesh Shlikis achieves this, basically how it takes the oil of the animal soul and turns it into fuel of the divine. So that has not yet been, he didn't get back to the moshel yet of the Ner, and he has not explained really, he said this is what we do, and you could do it, but he hasn't explained how do you do it. And remember, Ayin Beis is built very much on this whole piece. If you remember, the last section we learned in Ayin Beis till the end was all of how the Nefesh Elokis contemplates on Shema and Baruch Shem, Yichud Ilah, Yichud Tata, and the process educates the animal soul to develop a love for God as well. So in Torah we learned that the Rebbe Rashab never gets back to the Nefesh Habamis, but the themes that started on page 1466. Get my page wrong off there. 1466. And when he asked the question, he says, Shema, that is all based on what we're learning now, or what we'll be learning in the Mittler Rebbe. So this is, even though we've learned a lot more details about the Ner and a lot of things that Ayin Beis said, but now is going to come the real work of what does it take to explain a Nefesh Habam is that it should love God and not love its own self and its own pleasures and desires. So this is what we're getting into now. But the Mittler Rebbe does it very slowly and very methodically, builds it out and builds it out. Sorry, you wanted to say something?
No, I just called out an instruction manual.
Yeah, it is. So this is now going to be, I'll just give you just a sense of the pages. Wow. So the next few pages is going to be continuing the purpose of the divine soul coming into the body, into the animal soul. And then is going to begin the process on page 372, how it happens. And that's going to go quite a while. And that's going to be the next, I'll say, let's see if we're. Till page 390. So we're talking about 70, 80, 20 pages. He's going to talk about the basis of Ayin Beis till the end. And then he's going to go back to the Nefesh Habamis, then back to Ner Mitzvah, which the Rebbe Rashab never gets back to. So very much what we're learning now is literally what we have learned in Ayin Beis, but through the Mittler Rebbe's explanation, we will compare it to Ayin Beis, and then you'll see how the Mittler Rebbe continues where Ayin Beis leaves off. So this is now we're getting into that heart, but it's a good 20 pages more before we get even to Ner Mitzvah. Okay. Let's read a little more here. I'm on page 370, a new paragraph. V'hini yadua, and now it's known, B'tam inyan ha'yirida shel neshama b'guf, in the reason of the descent of a soul into a body, shezeu yirida gdela. This is a tremendous descent. It's not a small lowering yourself. It's a paradigm shift. Look, from a high place, Igra Rama, like a high rooftop, Libira Mikta, to a low pit. That's the expression used very often. Igra Rama, Libira Mikta. So from a very high place to a very low place. Kisheresh neshama, because the root of the soul is Ma'etzer ha'elyon. It comes from the higher, the supernal treasure. U'kamesha kasav, ba'ata nafachtabi. Like we said before, vayipach ba'apav nismas chaim, and we say every morning, va'ata, you ata, have nafachta, breathed or blew into me. Nafachta comes from the word naficha, to blow. The gam ata mesharba mekibri. So on one hand you say ata nafachta bi, but then you also protect my soul within me. Ulachzira bi, and you will return it to me. B'tchias hamesim beguf, the resurrection in the body. I'm sorry, beguf zeh dafke, and you'll return it to me dafke in this guf. So you see here all the extremes. It's nafachta bi from a high level, God's inner b'techi yusei is breathing, to the point where he has to protect it, means it's going down to a place that needs protection, and that he's also watching over it and will return it in that same body at Chiyas HaMesim. So this neshama, in other words, goes through many gradations, many levels in its journey. But overall, it's from a very high place to a very low place, this world. Shiridazu, just as the Yerida is a Gdela, is a great descent, this descent, its purpose is to bring a tremendous ascent, a tremendous elevation. V'hainu, which means this means mashatala achakach, that after its work in this world, the soul should elevate. L'mokim madrei gavoya shalamayla misharsha b'tchilas haviyase b'mkeira. That if it goes back to the same place where it came from, then what was the whole point? It has to go back to a place that's higher than the root of where the soul first originated from. So it's not like the soul was a certain level and now it's down here, it's going to go back there. It's going to go higher. Because there's something, in other words, accomplished in this Yerida that cannot be accomplished above. So this is a new point that he hasn't made yet. Again, this is not new points of Chassidus. I'm sure you've learned this idea. But in this Maimer, we have not yet discussed this. Till now, he was discussing to get the Nefesh Habamis involved. But we haven't talked about the Aliyah that the Neshama gets through the whole process to go to an even higher place. In Torah, we did learn that how the Nefesh Habamis, the Shemen, makes greater fire than the Psila, the wick does. But we'll get back to that later in the Mittler Rebbe. Okay. And with this, he also explains in the parentheses, when we speak about Chiyas HaMesim, so Chiyas HaMesim can sound, you know what? A person lived in this world, then for whatever reason, life came to an end, then they'll return. He said, no. And this is the reason the body returns. I'm sorry, the neshama returns to a body in this world, Tafke, sheyakum b'tchis medafke in this world, and will rise in resurrection of tchis hamesim. Ki memenu yovi lo yisun eragol b'tchis hamesim be'elam haba. It's not just a reward. It's not just an end of the process. It's because dafke, when it returns, it will come that advantage that it will get that it did not have before it came to this world. So the return by Tchis HaMesim is going to bring the neshama and the guf to the level that's higher than the neshama had before it came here in the first place. So in other words, Tchis HaMesim Haba is not just an end process reward; it's actually an elevation higher than the neshama was before it came to this world. So the question now is, well, it needs explanation. How? If El Misal Yenim, Atzilus, for example, is higher than Bria, and definitely higher than Asiya, and the Neshama is rooted in Atzilus, how could Asiya bring it higher than Atzilus? The higher worlds are spiritually more refined than the lower worlds. Now, I know, you know the answer already, because we learned the Nayim Beis, because the root of the Kalim is higher than the root of the Oir. And this again connects to what we learned in Nayim Beis. So he says the reason. Vatamhu. And what is the reason that coming down makes it go higher? Because the root for the coarse matter, the ruach habehema beguf, gashmis, of the ruach, of the breath or the spirit of the animal in the physical body, murkav medalad this. That's a composite of the four elements of Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Afar, fire, wind, or air, water, and earth. Gashmi, physical. Lamayla, its root is higher, much higher, than the root of the divine soul, which is called Ruach Adam. So even though in Giluyim the Ruach Adam is higher because it aspires to go upward and the animal goes downward, but in the root, the animal soul is rooted higher than the divine soul. Kiyadua, the Shedish Madregas Hativis, the Nefesh Abamis, that the root of the natural midas, emotions of the animal soul, Sheshoshem Beklipas Nega, that's rooted in that radiant klipa, husk, who mezayin midas the Tohu, or zayin malachim, probably midas. These are the 7 emotions of Tohu, shenoflu mishvidas hakelim, that fell down through the shattering of the containers, rapach nitzutzes, the 288 sparks that scattered as a result of the shattering of the containers, ad shenishtalsu v'yordu lamata, till they evolved and came down below. Liyes, hisavas klipas nega, to come and manifest in a state of klipas nega, where there's a klipa and there's a shell and a husk and a fruit inside, a spark inside. Like he says at the end of chapter 1 in Tanya, in the 7 negative emotions, like for example, kas and the other ones that he describes. Just as it is in this analogy of the animals, of the cattle and the destructive animals that are terfis, that are predators, umazikim, and terfis actually is 2 terms of predators. Terfis means a terif. They tear apart when they eat another animal. When they eat their food, they do it with terif in a very aggressive way. And mazikim means from the word destruction. So the animal soul comes down in that state that it can be very destructive. However, the root of it, Yadua, the shedish b'chinas elam hatayu, the root of the world of Tohu, hulamaylam b'chinas hatikun, is higher than the world of Tikkun. Ki b'chinas sag, shehu ban de Tohu, the level of sag, which is ban of Tohu, and I'll explain that momentarily. Lamaylam b'chinas ma de Adam the Tikkun is higher than ma of Adam of Tikkun. That's why it's a higher number. So we know there's the 4 permutations of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, ma, ban, sag, and ab. So ma is Gematria Adam Bittel Tikkun. Ban Gematria Behema is Tohu is Tohu. Ban is rooted in Sag. Sag is 63, even a higher name. Then there's Ayin Beis, which is not relevant right here to our discussion. So generally, you'll see that Sag is higher, is the root of Ban, which is higher than Ma. Like it says, Ve'ela HaMalachim. When we read the end of Parsha Vayishlach, where he talks about the kings that I mentioned, Vayimlach Vayamas, the 8 kings that ruled and then died, which refers to the 7 kings' emotions of Tohu. Vayamas is the shattering of the containers when they die. So it says, Ve'ela HaMalachim Koidem Lifnei Melech Melech Lebnei Yisrael. Before it talks about the kings that will rule the children of Israel, it talks about the kings of Esav, those ministers. And that precedes, Vayishlach comes before Vayeshev. In Vayeshev, we start talking about Yaakov. But in Vayeshev, it's talking about Esav. Why does it come first? Because it's a higher level. Al Kain. That's why. Gambi Ridosav and Ifilosa Lamata Mamish. That's why. When the animal soul, also when it descends and falls down below, Kamoy Midish Hativim, the Ruach HaBehemah canal, like the natural Midas, emotions of the animal, that's why it has concealed within it a tremendous power, strong power, and very intense. To the point that when you do refine these midas, that when you refine them through Shema of Adam, which comes from the Shama Lakis of Ma, of the world of Tikkun, what happens when you do finally refine them? Then these midas elevate all the way up in Tohu, in the level of Sag of Tohu. That's higher than Shema of Tikkun. This is the Cheshach and Helam, the darkness and concealment. Chashmal Elyon literally means the supernal electricity. It's a high level, higher than Tikkun. That's higher than the wisdom of Tikkun, as it's known. So, briefly, what did he say? That this Yirida of the Neshama is a very serious, very, very powerful descent in order to create a higher ascent. Why? Because by coming down below, it's refining the animal soul, which is rooted higher than the Neshama. Like he says here. That's why when you those midas of the animal soul have a lot of intensity. And when you refine it, you can tap into it and unleash that power.
Question?
Well, let me finish this more. Let me just finish the thinking. And therefore, by transforming the darkness and the crass darkness, the crass and coarse darkness of the animal soul, lamata, below, it elevates it to its source in the higher darkness. Remember, we learned about Helam Atzmi. Darkness can be a negative darkness. It can be a darkness that's higher than Gilu, than Oir. It's so high that it can be. It's not revealed. That is transformed to light. And that has a great advantage over the light of Chachma of Tikkun. This is the aliyah, the elevation of the neshama in this great descent below, that it receives reward mituv avedosa be'elam haza, from the great or the good, beautiful work it does in this world. Bislabshusha benefesh abamis, when it manifests in the animal soul, levarara or lahavcha, to refine and transform it. Kamei b'chol avavcha b'shnei yitzarecha kanal. Like we said, b'chol avavcha, both sides of the heart, also the yetzer hara. Through this, the divine soul elevates higher than its initial source. B'shema de tikkun, its source is shema. It elevates higher than that. That comes from the abundant energy and great energy that comes by transforming the higher darkness into light. The root of Shaloi Haya Oir Kazeh B'Shashe Klal Canal. This level of light, the divine soul did not have in its root. Canal, the Dal. The Dal Lemavin again. Enough for those that understand. Okay. Now she'll stop here. I'm happy to take any questions.
So my question is, to have the elevation of the neshama higher than from where it came, which is above Atzilus, right? And I understand it's because the Klipos Noga, the source is the Tohu, which the Tohu is higher than Atzilus. I got all that part, but I thought that when we live after 120 years, if we lived a good life and we were Mavara our neshamas, maybe we have a pit stop in Gehenna, who knows? But that our neshamas, Gan Eden is in either Yitzira or Bria. So I don't understand how, as a practical matter, unless you're a tzaddik, let's say, how can your soul elevate beyond Bria? If Gan Eden is in Bria, and if we're lucky enough, like how many neshamas actually make it to Gan Eden Ha'elyon? And how can you say the neshama is elevated above Atzilus, above Tikkun? I don't know. Do you understand the question?
No, but the answer is
you
very
don't understand it? Well, I'll make it even more simple if it's that complicated. Okay,
it's not complicated. To me, the answer is obvious. That's what the Avodah in this world is about. That even though neshama, wherever neshama is, whether it's a shama of Atzilus or Bria, Yitzir, Asiya, the work in this world is so powerful that it elevates us, as we learned even before the Tzimtzum, if you recall. The whole Ayin Beis is telling us that we can experience pre-Tzimtzum energy through Avodah. Without Avodah, everyone has their level. But Avodah elevates us to Atzilus and far higher. That's been the whole theme we've learned for, I don't know, hundreds. It's the whole Ayin Beis, actually, that we can experience as we transform the Tzimtzum through Avodah. We can go all the way up. Remember, he said about the Guf brings us to Helam Ha'atzmi, higher than the Oyer, even higher than Oyer HaKol Be'etzem, Helam Ha'atzmi, and even higher. That's been the whole theme. So the answer is through Avodah. That's exactly why Avodah down below is so powerful.
But it brings us to those higher places while the neshama is in the Guf. Once the neshama exits the Guf, it can't go any higher than Gan Eden, can it?
Why not?
Is there an example? I mean, like you can refer to?
All of Chassidus talks about, yes, of course it can. And now, you're talking about Gan Eden, you're talking about the La'asid Lave Tchias HaMesim. There's many levels. There's the neshama as it goes, right after a neshama lives in this world, it goes up to whatever level gets its schar. But then remember, he's speaking about Tchias HaMesim here. That La'asid Lave, when the Tchias HaMesim, then you have the whole world. This world will become a Keli to Atzmus.
Yes.
Atzmus is much higher than Atzilus.
Of course.
So it depends what you're talking about. If you're talking about throughout history, when neshamas, after they lived in this world, each one got to their level. But then there's the full elevation.
The ultimate, I see.
It comes when then we'll have the highest levels will be down here on this earth.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Here I will stop, because even though the next section is still relevant, but I think we covered a lot of ground here. So I'll stop here in the middle of page 371. Unless somebody wants to ask anything else. The next is going to talk about Balei Tshuva that are higher than Tzaddikim, which of course help explain this idea. I think the next section will also help understand what you just asked. Okay. Okay. So we'll stop in the middle of page 371.